My name is Michelle Mundy. I am the founder of Onpar. So great intro. Don't need to really say any more than that at this point. I wanted to start with a question. Obviously, thank you for putting in the chat where you're from, but I am also wondering what your roles are within the agencies. So if we can enter that in the chat, it just helps me sort of customize who I'm speaking to and how I'm speaking and some of the strategies that I might suggest. So if you want to put it in the chat, if you're a partner, or if you're a partner and a C-suite, or if you're just a project team member, so somebody who's actually an executor, founder works too. Awesome.
Tolu, founder, CEO. Tony, also founder. I have a lot of founders.
I am also curious, I didn't put this in here, but now I'm thinking, of course, I'm thinking all these questions now. I am curious also the size of your agencies, if you all are comfortable saying how many employees you have. I'll give it just another like 30 seconds to do that.
Darren, 2 employees. Tolu, 11. Tony, 1 trillion.
1 trillion. Wow.
Tony.
That would be a very, very high revenue, one would assume. All right, awesome. So I'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to first start with sort of defining scalability. So I define scalability in my own sort of way. This is not necessarily what you'd find on Webster's dictionary, but this is my interpretation of what I believe, especially from an agency perspective, scalability be. So it's the ability for your agency to grow with the ebbs and flows of the demand. So as you all know, it looks like I have founders on here. You know, it can be tough sometimes to predict what might be coming down the pipeline. And, you know, you staff up, you want to staff down, you want to have the ability to sort of be able to expand and contract with the given demand of what's coming down your sales pipeline. So that's how I just define it. When it comes to scalability and growth, I am a firm believer in really making sure that we understand what healthy looks like versus unhealthy. So healthy growth has a bit of a more like S curve to it as it goes up, so that you have an opportunity to what I call stabilize the business at certain points in order to make sure that you're not, one, obviously, you know, the unhealthy graph on the left is burning out your employees probably pretty significantly. You're probably being very reactive because you're not giving yourself enough of that stabilization time to take a step back, make sure you adjust with the changes that might be happening as you evolve as a business. And also with that comes with a profitability loss. So just because, let's pretend these bars are revenue, just because your revenue is going up, you might be actually not making as much profit because you're sort of in reactive mode and you're not putting a lot of strategy into how that growth takes place. So keeping in mind, a healthy growth doesn't look like doubling your revenue every year. It doesn't look like, you know, necessarily doubling the amount of employees that you have. I hear people kind of brag about that sometimes. Oh, well, we doubled the amount of employees we had this year. That sounds exhausting, you know, and that sounds, you know, it's great for growth, but it also is not always the healthiest way to grow. Although it's great, I think it's important to utilize vendors. I'll go into all the strategies behind this, but just keeping that in mind with how I'm going to be suggesting. This is going to be a very tangible thing that you can literally walk away and actually implement this at I'm giving you like the step-by-steps. So keep that in mind, that that's sort of the thought process with this. So why does scalability matter? You know, the sales dip. So as you all know, the sales pipelines, they, again, ebb and flow. Sometimes they're really packed, sometimes they're not. And so we need to make sure that we're able to scale with that. Retainers end. So I know a lot of agencies now are doing retainer-based work. These long-term engagements are fantastic, but they can't end, and they can end pretty abruptly sometimes. And so if you're counting on that revenue and you suddenly lose it, what are you going to do and how are you prepared to handle that? And then expenses pop up. So especially when you're starting to, from my own experience, when you're starting to maybe dip into a different type of vertical. So maybe you're a digital shop, you're trying to go into the VR, AR space, or, something that's totally different, you're going to suddenly find that there's expenses that you just hadn't even thought of that might come up. So with growth, with changing maybe your specialty or growing your capabilities, there's also costs that come with that. And then employees leave. So this is a fun fact. The average US employee stays between 3 or 4 years at a company now. So that's according to a 2022 Bureau of Labor statistic. So it's pretty wild, because when I was a kid, my dad, for example, worked at the same company for, 35, 40 years. So it's crazy to me that nowadays, employees will leave. So you really have to have your own way of operating as an agency and have your own sort of agency way of doing things that don't necessarily cater to the talent that you have there, because they will leave. Okay, now I'm going to get more positive. All right, so so here's the 5 steps. The 5 steps to healthy scalability is: 1, you want to make sure that you're defining the roles. 2, you want to create an actual roadmap to how you're going to get to those roles. 3 is you want to build an infrastructure around that is quite literally around getting those goals and putting those goals in hitting those goals. 4 is actually designing and implementing workflows in the way that people work together in order to hit those goals. And then my favorite topic, which is often missed, is this idea of monitoring, controlling, and then refining. This is not something you're going to do one time. It's something that you're going to do this whole end-to-end process every single year. You should be doing it every single year. All right, so number 1, defining your goals. You got to know where you're going. So, a lot of times, again, some agencies can be incredibly reactive with their approach. And you really want to make sure that you're taking the time to think about, what do I want the next year to look like? What do I not the next 3 years or 5 to 10 years? I've seen them both. This is if you've heard of the EOS framework, this is one of their key ways of doing it. I'm a big fan of EOS. If you haven't read Traction, it's one of my favorite books, but they kind of teach you how to really set these targets in a very tangible framework. I'm going to go into the next layer below that, which is going to show you exactly how to do it. So within these targets, you want to either define your values if you don't have them. If you do have them, redefine them. You want to put together some revenue targets for each of these year targets. You want profit targets. You want number of employees targets. You want to, some agencies want to remain small, some want to scale big. Know that, know what your goal is in mind. There's also client retention rate. So how, what do you want that sort of client retention rate to be? Which is essentially a percentage formula. I can go over that if anyone has any questions about that. And then there's qualitative goals too. Especially since you're founders, do you want to sell the agency someday? Do you want to expand globally and have offices all around the world? Do you want awards and notoriety? These are things that you need to define, and you need to know where you're going, essentially. So here are the key performance indicators using that sort of idea in mind. I'm going to be using this, I'm calling it Agency X as our example agency. So Agency X is currently at 1 million annual revenue. Just to let you know, based off for your goals, your target should be around 150 to 200K per employee. That's kind of the average. And then there's an 8% net profit. There's 6 employees at this agency, and there's a 50% client retention rate. So we're basically taking this and we're going to start to tie goals to it. So we want the annual revenue target. They want to go up 500K this year. So let's assume we have a whole year to do that. In 3 years, they want to hit 5 million, and year 10, they want to hit 12. Their net profit targets are obviously going up by 5% each year. Their number of employees are going up, and then also the client retention rate. So keeping in mind, these are just, I invented these numbers. This is our fake agency. But this is how you sort of want to start laying out your target KPIs. So then you want to basically take it and you want to start to create a roadmap. So this is where I think some agencies don't take the time to really start to drill them down. So we've now started at imagine this higher level sort of revenue goal. Now we need to break it down into the tangible goals that are going to be tracked along the way to get there. So in this case, for our agency X, if we want to hit 1.5 million annual revenue, we need to create quarterly sales goals to hit that. We need to create a project gross margin so that the project management team and the people managing the budgets of the team have a KPI to track to. We need to have a goal with new hires in order to make sure that we're constantly scaling up the team. One, to assume that that sales goal is also meeting with that when it comes to utilization and things like that. And then we need to set client retention goals as well. So really, these are the breakdown goals to ensure each of the goals are strategically reached and managed over time. One of the biggest things I want, if you take nothing out of this, it's about delegation. You are not going to be able to reach these goals yourself. So that's one of the reasons we start to break it down this way, is to assign, and I'll go over this in a second, but is to assign owners to now this next layer of goals. So the next layer of goals, now we need to break down that sales goal, right? So we started with the annual revenue. Now we're breaking down the sales. We know we want to make 500K. Don't make it too complicated. If you do have a more predictable sales pipeline, you may adjust these numbers and not have them be even. I've seen a lot of times it might be more heavy in Q4, take a little dip in Q3 and heavy in Q2, whatever works for your agency and sort of looking at your historicals. But in this case, we're going to say, 125K each month. And this is on top of the $1 million they're already making. So one is to assume they're going in with, let's say it's 2023, they already have likely like a retainer-based model already set up with clients that is at $1 million. So this is having a salesperson dedicated to finding that extra 5K to get them to that next level for revenue. There's also the project gross margin. So again, taking it to that next level of project managers being able to manage the gross margin at a project level that influences the net profit in the long term. Number of employees, we said we wanted to reach 10 in the first year. Our agency X was at 6. So theoretically, we want to add 4 people essentially this year. And then client satisfaction score. This is a way of surveying the client. I'm not going to go into the details of this because I don't have time, but essentially scoring basically client satisfaction by doing surveys and interviews with them after the work or even during the work if it's a retainer. So there's a solid progression of getting them to basically an average of 75% by the end of the year. So again, you want to build the infrastructure. And so because of that, you want to make sure that this again is in my opinion, one of the most important pieces. Now you have these goals on the left, right? They're the next layer down. Who is going to own them? There needs to be an owner for every single one of these KPIs. They are responsible and accountable to these numbers. The sales goals, if it's a lot of times it's the founder, that's fine. If you do have a business development team or salesperson, that's great too. But they are responsible for sharing how they're tracking to their KPIs for the year. Project gross margins, typically project management. Some agencies, depending on the size, might have account management and project management as the same role. That's okay. In this case, that can be the same person. New hires, if you don't have an operations manager, this might be the CEO, but it's somebody who's essentially responsible for the recruiting side of things and making sure that we're hitting those 4 extra roles. And then there's the client retention side, which I would normally say is an account manager, but again, that can be like a client services, I've heard it called, but account manager and a project manager might be intertwined or the same person. So this is how it would look like for our example agency. So our example agency, all the ones in the teal green are already existing employees. So this CEO has gone into the year, let's pretend like it's January 2023 with a client services manager who is essentially, again, that sort of liaison to be project management, account management. They have an ops manager, they have a creative director with a UI designer, and then they have a technology side of things as well. So what you want to do is start to think, okay, so if these are my goals and these are the people who own it, think I need to start to scale these people, right? I need to be able to make it so that they have time to actually track this stuff. So that's why some of these you'll see, especially the client services, we're going to start to, well, the new hires then should be people who can work on the billable work, who can help to manage these KPIs at that client project level. And so how I would recommend scaling this agency that we're using as an example is first by looking at hiring a project manager and an account manager. So now you have someone managing the budgets, the timelines of the projects, but you also have someone who owns the client relationship. And then you have someone managing them who is essentially also responsible for that main KPI that applies to the project management and account management team. If you are a CEO, I think sometimes CEOs wait too long to hire salespeople. That's a very bold thing to say, but that's my feelings. I think a lot of times the CEOs try to do it on their own for as long as they can. But, this business development person doesn't have to be a full-time employee. You can set up referral agreements where they're just commission based. So you're just giving them, 10% cut of everything that comes in. They can be salary and full-time, but then you have someone who actually owns it and you can own a little bit more of the strategy side of things. Regardless, just keeping in mind, there are people who specialize in sales and it's not always I'm a founder too. So sales is not where my background, it's not where I come from. I get a lot of my sales from existing relationships and doing things like this, but am I like a traditional salesperson? No. So, sometimes there is a lot of value in finding someone who is really great at sales. So that's my 2-second sales pitch for salesperson. Then it's an ops manager. I highly recommend if you're going to hire someone right out of the gate, like an ops manager would be a really great one to hire. The one thing that's the rub with them is that they're not billable. So, keeping in mind, if you were going to have like one full-time person and then I know somebody was talking about Upwork, use freelancers for everything else. I suggest the freelancers come from the project world, and then you do have someone who can be your right hand to own the operations side. They can actually be the people to help also keep all of these KPIs on track for you, so that again, you can own a little bit more of influencing the strategy and potentially the sales of the organization. Okay, and then creative director. Okay, this is just one that goes into sometimes, when it comes to especially digital shops who design websites, things like that, you might find, okay, one designer is not enough, or maybe we want to hire a UX, somebody who owns more of the user experience strategy side of things. That might be another hire as well. So this is just an example of what that might look like from a setting up your organization and infrastructure side of things. And it ties essentially directly to those KPIs. Then we want to look at workflows. So every single department that you see here should have their own set of processes that tie to those KPIs. So every single one of these people have a standardized process ideally, and have it documented in a knowledge base for the agency. And they are in charge of essentially running that process on a regular basis and tracking those KPIs and sharing that with the CEO or the leadership team. So I gave a few examples here for our agency X, but these are also just examples in general. So we really need to define the end-to-end processes if you haven't done so already. For business development, we need a lead generation process. We need a pricing process. So how are we pricing new business that comes in? All of these have to have strategies behind them that also, again, you tie to the end revenue goals. The project management side of things, you want to have a budget management. How are they going to track their budgets? With the budget, how do they measure the project gross margin? So making sure that they have a way of actually measuring that percentage and sharing that again up with the CEO or leadership. There's going to be a scope management side of things. That's a process. And then one of my other favorite topics is vendor management. So again, I don't think you have to hire all these people out of the gate. I wouldn't recommend it. Again, you want to go with the ebbs and flows of the business. And a lot of times that requires vendor partnerships or working with freelancers. But you need someone to own those relationships. So really, I find that project management or client services is a great, really well suited to do that. I've also seen it with operations managers, just to let you know. From a hiring perspective, there's a application process, there's an interview process, there's a onboarding process. I could go on and on with HR, but there's all sorts of processes within here to make sure that we're getting the right talent and we're hitting those sort of hiring goals at the end of the year. And then client partnerships, which is like the account management or client services, the client onboarding experience. What does that process look like? How do you kick off projects, correctly with clients? And then what is that feedback process? If we're going to be measuring client satisfaction and client retention, we need to have a process put in place for measuring that along the way. So I'm going to give an example here, not to jump into sales again, but I do this a lot with my clients, is looking at their sales process. I am not, again, a salesperson, but I do have sort of a pretty standardized way of doing it from like a sales, what I call sales operations perspective. So it's like, how do you take a new business and put it through the pipeline, include the rest of your team, and essentially once you sell it through, how do you onboard the project properly? So that's kind of what you're seeing here, but this is what a business development lead and or the CEO, the process that they would manage. These would likely be swim lanes in your HubSpot or your CRM. But so the first one would be the lead generation. So how are we generating new business? Again, I'm tying each of these back to the KPIs, right? This is the sales goal. Qualifying, does the opportunity meet our expertise? Really making sure this from a client retention, I know it's kind of seems like a leap, but there is something to, if this is what you specialize in, the client's going to know that and is going to stay longer if you truly are an expert in what it is you're selling. The proposal process, so knowing employee capacity, this has a lot to do with whether or not you need to hire someone, whether or not you need to hire a vendor. So really making sure, do you have the people available? I always recommend you do this if you're writing a proposal, making sure that you have the people available, or you have some sort of strategy to hiring a vendor or a freelancer in that case. That's going to help obviously with employee retention, but also from a knowing when to hire and not. And then at closing, is there an estimated gross margin? So if we are going to have the project management team managing and owning the project gross margin, we need to make sure that they know what that estimated gross margin is. So we can have a target of, ideally you'd be between 60, 65%, I always recommend, but let's say our example agency is at 55 right now. Making sure that you've created some sort of estimate, no matter how you sell the work. I know value-based pricing is really big right now. I know retainer-based pricing is also big. There is something to, though, knowing what the level of effort will be. So even if you're not charging hourly, it is important to understand how much effort you think a project or an engagement will be. And that's where you're going to get an estimated gross margin target that they can manage. All right, so then there's the stabilizing side of things. So you're going to take all that stuff. We're going to assume that now, okay, your team here now has all these KPIs tied to their roles. They have processes in place. Now we need to make sure that we are monitoring, controlling, and refining as we go. So what I recommend is doing this quarterly. So each of them have their own quarterly goals that are tied again to that next layer that they own, and then also to the overall agency goals in general. You want to be able to make sure that they are managing those new processes on a daily basis, but also controlling the results of those processes by sharing a report with the founder or the leadership team on a weekly basis. The reason you want to do it weekly, although we are looking at like doing sort of a quarterly business review at the end of the quarter, you also want to be sharing it weekly because you want to get ahead of anything. You might see that something suddenly is projecting to be, and believe me, this isn't even inventing, I've seen this before, like a 30% margin, on a project because, maybe the scope's not being controlled properly. Maybe they are, they're just behind on development. There's QA issues. There's all sorts of reasons, right? But we want to see that as early as possible so we can take the proper action to prevent that 30% gross margin from happening in the end. And that's where the strategy comes in. So we're going to create sort of solutions along the way to like really target those blockers and risk items and strategically, basically influence them as you go. And then you want to refine it. So again, this is potentially happening on a weekly basis, and it's being owned primarily by, the rest of the team with you as the leader, if you're a CEO, but you're going to refine it along the way. So again, if things are not projecting to be hitting those targets, then we need to refine it and figure out a way to make sure that we're hitting those goals along the way. So, so here's some stabilization reports. So when I talk about having sort of this control, I call it control. I know it's a little bit of a dramatic word, but there's reports that are going to be shared out on a weekly basis. I could go on and on. I could probably even create more reports than this. These are just examples of the types of reports that I have found valuable and the owners of them who should be sharing these on a weekly basis updates. I want to also caveat, this is not as much work if you automate it as much as possible as you think. So setting it up, yes, can be a bit of a project, like setting up all of these processes and these reports. Once you get them done, this really should only be taking this team like, an hour to pull this information. So the sales report, just standard sales reporting that should be coming out of HubSpot or whatever you're using for your sales management. But the number of new leads, the deals in progress, the deals that were lost, the deals won. From an accounts perspective, I'm sure you all have experienced this, but accounts can sometimes be some of the best salespeople in an agency. So you want to really make sure that you're also including them in a weekly sales meeting or report where there's upselling and cross-selling opportunities that they might bring up. And then also just the sales goal tracker. How are we tracking our revenue to what are sales goals? Then there's a weekly project health report. So this is owned by the client services team, project management, and account management. So are there any new projects that have just been kicked off? What is the employee utilization right now? So really understanding by department, by person, being able to break that down. What is the project gross margin tracking? How's that tracking? So not only from an average perspective, because we need to know how it's tracking to the end goal, but also on a project by project basis so that we can influence that. Project status, so that you know essentially where each of the projects are at or engagements are at. The accounts would own the client satisfaction update. They should again be doing some sort of survey or interview with clients on a regular basis. And then any opens and blockers. Again, this is going to be that sort of strategy side of things where identify any of these and let's work together to make sure that we can course correct anything that needs to be course corrected. And then the operations report, you probably have some of these already, I would hope, but this would be owned by operations, but it's basically a continuous update of how we're tracking the revenue, cost, net profit. There's a ton of other things I'm sure we could also include in that. Human resources, the turnover rate, once you get bigger, that will become important. The recruiting update, so people, new hires, things like that, new positions, open positions, who are you interviewing people? What is that? Employee satisfaction, just making sure that how happy are your current employees? So an operations person should sort of own, like doing culture checks with your staff. And then forecasting. So staff utilization, again, we're doing it at a project level on the project health side. The ops side, we're doing it at a global level. So we're looking at, in general, how are we tracking on average for utilization of employees? So it's the billable utilization for them. A risk analysis. So is there anything from an ops perspective that's being identified and maybe the other departments that needs to be potentially looked at? And then any sort of strategy as being pulled essentially from not only what the other departments are sharing, but what might come out of some of these reports from a finance perspective, especially. So my final thoughts, these are just sort of the other things that I would love to put in here if I had more time, but get organized. In order to really make sure that you're successful with this, you got to have a very structured sort of template sort of way of doing, templatized way or systematized way of doing this. So be organized about it. Be patient. This is a long game. This is not something that happens overnight, unfortunately. Find partners. Again, I think vendor partnerships are so important. My previous agency that I worked at, that I really was a critical part of like scaling that company to, when I started, I was the 30th employee. By the time I left, it was 180 people. So it was quite a bit of growth in a 5-year period. Vendor partnerships were key to that, because there were times where we wanted to take on a new opportunity. We didn't have the staff for it, but we had these vendor relationships that we already had warm, that we knew were available. We were able to hand it off to them and still win the business, which is great. Celebrate the wins. There's going to be little wins along the way, that you just want to make sure that you're celebrating, especially with the rest of your employees. Learn to delegate, especially if you're a founder or CEO. Please delegate. You got to learn how to scale yourself. You can't do it all on your own. Hold people accountable. Make sure that now that you have these people owning these KPIs, you got to hold them accountable. Be consistent. Every week you send out these reports. There's really no, if they're not available, they're on vacation. Every once in a while it's okay, but for the most part, they should have coverage, somebody sharing that information. Balance billable and non-billable. Everything can't be billable. You got to give people some non-billable time from a culture perspective, but also from a managing these KPIs. Risk mitigate, create what if scenarios and have a plan. So make sure that you're also, when you're setting up these goals, you're also sort of thinking about, you're putting in some level of thought into what could happen and along the way that might deviate you from hitting these targets, and have a plan of how you'll tackle that. So that's basically it. That's my presentation. Again, I could probably do like a 2-hour talk on this, but I'll save you and just keep it at that for now. So I'll take questions.
We'll do it to our next time, a 2-hour one.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be riveting for you guys.
All right, guys. So we'll jump into the questions shared through the registration form. We have some great ones over there. But I encourage you to take this chance to ask questions in the chat of things that you saw in the presentation that you want to know how they apply to your agency. And I'll if we have enough space, I'll make sure to ask them. So let's go ahead with the first one from Mark. So this is an interesting one. At what level, number of customers or dollars does this, what you just presented, kind of need to happen? You need to start thinking about it and working towards it.
At what? I'm sorry. What? Can you repeat the question? At what
Yes,
level?
at what size of agency? What number
yeah.
of customers or dollar, revenue?
I would say 1. I mean, I think, I think when you're a one-person show, this is a business plan. This is sort of a strategy for yourself. Even if you're just creating it on your own, that's okay. Everyone starts somewhere. So I personally started, my business with creating a business plan that was very similar to this strategy. I don't think this basically applies to anything that's a service-based business. So start as early as you can.
Nice. Okay, so this is a question of mine based on your response. So
yeah,
how much time should a founder, or let's say a manager, when implementing a kind of an operations manual like this for the various processes within their departments, how much time should they be spending on that out of their total time, let's say each week?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that a lot of that ties back to how you're tracking utilization too. So let's assume you have a leadership team. A leadership team, if, especially once they have direct reports, should really not be above 50-60% billable. And that is because a percentage of their head needs to be 1, managing these strategies, and 2, managing the people that report into them. So I would say on average, if I needed to tie a number to it, I'd say 20 to 30% of their head. This is a huge, it's a huge influence into the business, and it should be prioritized appropriately.
Right. No, that's important for me personally. So thank you. I'll follow that advice.
Yeah.
A question from Darren, what would you recommend? What tools would you recommend for recruiting full-time or part-time employees? Like he gives an example of Upwork, etc.
Yeah, I love Upwork. Upwork has, I love Upwork. So I think Upwork is a great place to start. The one rub with Upwork, and I'm being recorded, so I have to be careful. You can't, if let's say you find one of the best designers ever and like you're just loving working with them and you want to hire them full time, or you want to be able to kind of hire them exclusively, there is a fee that comes with that with Upwork, as well as there are rules with regards to how you can communicate with the staff and what tools they're using on their end with regards to communication. Because of that, but I find that it can be limiting. LinkedIn is great. I've actually found I found a UX designer who's like fantastic once just by doing a LinkedIn search of freelance UX designers. Referrals are fantastic. So, you know, I highly recommend looking into finding people through referrals or people who have worked with them before. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'd recommend from a tool. I try to stay away as much as possible from things that, I mean, there's obviously staffing companies, but they're going to take a chunk of the percentage, especially in the beginning. Upwork, that's why Upwork's kind of a better option, because the fee's really low and there's a ton of talent on there. But I haven't always had the best success with finding the most, I don't know, qualified people, I guess. Hasn't always been as great. So hopefully that answers your question. With regards to like freelance, when it comes to like recruiting, you know, LinkedIn Recruiter is fantastic. It is kind of expensive, but it is a really, if you've never used it, it's a great tool to help you get like more inside information on who's looking, and really refine who you're looking for.
Great. Let us know if that answers your question, Darren. In the meantime, we'll move to the next question, which is from Joe, who asks, how much importance would you place on the culture of the agency when scaling?
I mean, I think I mentioned this, but yeah, I mean, I would put a lot of, I would put a lot of emphasis on that. You know, part of that unhealthy scaling model that I showed you is an impact to culture. But I will caveat, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I will caveat with, again, you want to set these targets and you want to set your own sort of agency way of doing things. Yes, considering the culture, but not consider. I've seen culture be too taken into consideration, where it's like a decision, a partner can't even make a decision without you know, sort of like surveying the entire staff. I think that there's a place for that, but I think there's also something to be said for a founder being very certain of where they want to go and sort of the standard way of doing things. So yes, consider culture, of course. That's why we want to make sure also they have that utilization. They have the space to do this stuff, so you're not burning people out, but also have a way that your agency operates, that the culture kind of has to just mold to.
Right. The culture being kind of tied to the healthy versus unhealthy diagram is spot on, at least for me. Scott is asking a question about client relationships. So it's a bit of a longer one, like a little story. He says, accessibility is a pain point for many client agency relationships. We often hear about clients who felt underserved by the previous agency, so they are looking for a new partnership. What are some ways that you approach accessibility and communication with clients that provide the right balance of attentiveness to client needs, but enables boundaries to be in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. My biggest recommendation with this is it's all in your positioning in the beginning. I think that you have to make sure that when you're selling something through to the client, you are positioning yourself as an expert in your field. As a result, it's not your job to take another another client's, like take on a client burden of maybe they had a really bad experience previously, and now you have to basically, cater to their every need just because they have maybe trust issues that had been developed from a previous relationship for them. So my biggest recommendation with this is position yourself as an expert up front, know what you're worth, price yourself that way, and make sure that the rest of the team and the people managing the team along the way also are taking that approach with regards to, I am the expert in what it is I'm doing, and I make sure along the way you never feel like you might be question that. So I think it is also a culture thing, going back to the culture thing, it is a culture thing as well. If know what you specialize in, make sure the rest of your staff are experts in that as well, and make sure that will indirectly create trust with that client. But I do not believe, because I've been in this position myself, that you should take on the burden of fixing a broken relationship or perspective that this client might have for agencies just because another agency burned them. Win over their trust by just doing amazing work. Don't, it sounds bad, but don't do them any favors. Don't do extra scope. Don't, charge less just to win them over. Like, hold true to who you are as an agency.
That's very nice. It's yeah, spot on. We have I think another question that I missed from Darren. He asked what level, and this will be the last question we take. What level of margins would you target with clients as a ballpark?
Which margins, as in the gross margin?
Darren, if you'd like to clarify in the chat. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I recommend, so my like, if we want to be really specific, I recommend 66%. Let me explain why. It's because it's very specific. It's because I actually have it's called an estimator sheet where it kind of automatically figures this out for you if you put in the level of effort to do the work. But essentially what it is you have 33% of that is going into paying the people for doing the work. 33% is the cost of doing business. So it's just operating a business in general. And then one is to hope that 33% is going to contribute to that net profit goal. And so that's why I say 66%, because 66% gives you, takes out that 33% of the people doing the work and allows you 33% for operating the business, and then that hopefully 33% that can contribute to the net profit margin. Let me know if that doesn't make sense. In the end, that equals 99%, but you get the point.
Curious, Darren, before hearing this answer, what margin were you targeting? What was the number you had in your mind as the, let's say,
that is a good question.
Okay,
I bet you it's going to be like 50, 55. Nothing.
Tell us, Darren. Don't leave us hanging.
He may not want to tell us.
Very curious.
He doesn't have to.
Sorry, frozen. 50.
Yeah.
50.
Yeah. My whole thing is, when you're a service-based company, I think you should be targeting at least 60 personally. I think that you can get away with it. I think if 50, if you have low operating costs, for sure. But as you scale up, you're going to have more salaries. So you're going to have more people, more health coverage, that all those costs go up. And I definitely recommend you stay within 60 to 66%, ideally 66% for the reasons I just, yeah.
Very cool. This was great. All right. Michelle, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can check out my website. It's onparapp.io. You could also email me directly at michelle@onparapp.io. I also wanted to just throw this out as an option for you all if you're interested. It's kind of cut off. I do offer a workshop that customizes essentially this growth strategy for your agency. Right now, I will say it's the perfect time to start thinking about this. It includes and I'm sort of piloting a more streamlined version of this. Just to let you know, this normally would take me a quarter with a client, but it would be a 2-hour workshop with you can't see this, hold on, let me just exit out. It would be a 2-hour workshop with the partners or the owners or founders of the agency. Then you would do a 2-hour workshop with the leadership. So with the partners, we would define all of those high level goals. Then we'd have the leadership team. We'd start defining what those next level goals. We'd set you up with a KPI tracker. I actually have a template that helps keep you on track with all this stuff. There are also incredible tools that you can convert that sort of spreadsheet into. If you've never heard of Lattice, it's fantastic. And then I will also provide you a rollout strategy. So how you are going to tackle this year after year and do that sort of monitoring and controlling. Normally this would be $10,000, but for right now, I'm trying to pilot out this sort of rapid version of this. If you sign up in November, it'll be 5,000. So if you're interested, there's limited seats available for this, but if you want to take what I've shared with you and customize it to your agency, then go ahead and email me, reach out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle, for the wonderful presentation, also answering the questions. There were some great questions and answers as well. Everyone attending, I hope you got some good value out of this. Keep an eye out for the recording. I'll be sending that out tomorrow. Do reach out to Michelle to discuss more in depth how you could implement this kind of operational strategy for your agency. And I'll
It looks like Darren has one more question. Can I answer one more question?
If you'd like, go ahead.
Sure, I don't mind. Yeah, I got the time.
Sure.
Yeah, Darren, just to answer your question, great question. I think that
so let me just repeat it. So
oh, go ahead. Oh yeah, sorry.
What strategies do you use to upsell or raise pricing for existing customers?
Yeah, so I think a lot of agencies don't take this into tie a strategy to this, and I think they should. I think they allow it to happen organically, which is fantastic, but having a strategy to it, you're actually leaving money on the table in some cases. So what I mean by upselling or cross-selling, meaning either adding scope to an existing engagement or an existing project, or starting to sell things that they might not be used. So let's say they're doing web design and you're developing this website for them. You might be during the project be like, we also do branding. Like if you'd like us to take a look at your messaging and your logo, like we'd be happy to also include that. Really making sure your account team is loaded with strategies like that. And when they're regularly syncing with your existing clients, they're helping to find those opportunities, and maybe in some cases bring in the salesperson. I've seen that as well. Incentivizing the accounts team is also a great strategy. A lot of people don't do. They can make commission too. And so I've seen some agencies where the account team is like just keeping business running. So they can be a very valuable resource.